decisions and they implement the decisions, right? That's in a small and a medium-sized church, okay? As you get a larger medium-sized church, you start getting staff on board, okay? Church still operates the same way, but here's what happens. Committees make the decision and the staff implements the decision. So like you have an education committee and now you've hired an education director. Education director has no authority in the education program. They go to the education committee. The education committee says, hey, we're going to do a vacation Bible school this year, and guess what? You go do it. And that's normal and natural through the progression, but here's what has to happen. At some point, for a church to go from medium to large, those roles need to be reversed. And so now the staff person starts making the decisions, and the committees start implementing the decisions. So you go from committees making decisions and implementing decisions to now committees start to make decisions, but they ask the staff to implement the decisions. But then you have to make the decision to switch and let the staff make the decision and the committee implement the decision. And if you don't make that switch of control and power, you'll get stuck at a medium-sized church, which is what happened to Peace. That's one of the things that gets you stuck. And so I'm trying to help them make that switch. Here's the way a small church and medium-sized church works. You got to get a whiteboard for a room, right? Let's say the Sunday school class wants a whiteboard. So you go to education committee, and if you have an education director, if you're big enough to have a staff person, they go to the education committee and say, I want a whiteboard for this classroom. Education committee talks about it, and they say, okay, we think that's a good idea, but we don't have any funds, so now we have to go to the finance committee, right? So they go to the finance committee, and they talk about it, and then because you're going to put a whiteboard up on the wall in a room, you have to go to trustees, right? So then you go to next month to trustees and ask them, can we put a whiteboard up on the wall? And then in our church, you had to go to council on ministries after that to get their approval, and then you had to go to the ad board after that to get their approval. So 5 months later, if you're lucky, you get a whiteboard up on your wall, right? Now, that works okay in a smaller church where there's not as many decisions, and a lot of times if it's an even smaller church, the same people are on all the committees, right? They already know what's going down the pipe. But you get into a medium-sized church, it literally takes 5 months to get a whiteboard up on the wall. The way a staff-led church works is the education person decides they want a whiteboard up on the wall, and they look at their budget, and they say, oh, I've got $50 extra in my budget, so they go down to Walmart and buy a whiteboard, and they stick it up, and they have it up in one day. Yeah. And if they don't have the money in their budget, then they go to their supervisor and say, I don't have money in my budget, so the discipleship director of the church looks at a bigger budget, and they say, you know, they're controlling more money, and they say, well, I can go talk to the youth, because I don't think they're going to spend this money over here, and you can go get your whiteboard. And if the discipleship director doesn't have enough money, then they go to the senior pastor and say, you know what, I don't have any money, but you know, our children's ministry person wants a whiteboard up. Can you get me $50? And I look at a $500,000 budget, and I say, yeah, I think I can find $50 for you over here. And I may need to talk with one other person to get that done. In 3 or 4 days, worst case scenario, they got a whiteboard up as opposed to 5 months. The worst case scenario is I can't find $50 and $500,000, and so I go to the board and I say, you know what, we have a $500,000 budget, and we really need this whiteboard up on the wall, and I can't find $50 anywhere, so I need you to increase the budget from $500,000 to $500,050. And I need you to vote on that. Would you do that? And they'll vote on it. So the worst case scenario is going to take a month to get, but that very rarely happens for a $50 thing. It's going to take, it may happen that day or 2 to 3 days later. That's the difference between staff-led and committee-led. And if a church doesn't make that switch in the medium to the large size, they're never going to do it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How's it?
You have a similar problem with transitioning from small membership to a medium-sized attendance church.
Absolutely.
But in a small membership church, you don't have buku committees.
Right,
You have Grandma Zella.
right. Yeah, that's a whole nother.
It might still take her 5 months to decide.
That's a whole nother one I can do for you. Talking about the transition of church sizes and what needs to happen from going from small to medium to large. Because I've lived that one out. Here's what I found out about Wesley, and I want to talk about this real quickly. When I poured into Wesley, I started looking at, okay, what's his discipleship system look like? And I tried to put it in a form that made sense in kind of our culture today. So I put it in stages and